The autumn rain fell hard on Seattle, blurring the reflected lights across the glass towers of Halberg Tech. On the 42nd floor, the city dissolved into streaks of amber and white below a sky that had been dark since 4 in the afternoon. Victoria Halberg stood motionless before her monitor, watching the alert cascade in pulsing red. Server breach data deletion in progress. She pressed her palm flat against the desk to steady herself. $12 billion. The merger with Cascade Systems was scheduled to close at 9 the following morning. The due diligence documents, the encrypted IP files, the client migration data, everything was inside the system that was now eating itself alive. She reached for her phone to call the CTO. Then she heard the quiet squeak of wheels in the hallway. A man in gray maintenance coveralls was pushing a cleaning cart past the glass partition. He glanced in, not the way building staff usually glanced at executive suites, the careful, averted look of someone paid not to notice but directly at the screens. He stopped. He looked at the monitor for 3 full seconds. Then, without raising his voice, he said through the cracked door, "That isn't a system failure. Someone is deleting from inside the network." Victoria turned. The man was already looking at his cart, as if he hadn't spoken at all. She stared at him for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she said, "Come in." Victoria Halberg had not taken a vacation in 11 years. Her assistant, a composed young man named Preston, who had lasted 18 months longer than anyone before him, kept a calendar that looked like a military operations board. Color-coded blocks, no gaps, no personal entries except for a standing reminder every December 23rd that simply read, "Call Mother 8 minutes max." She had founded Halberg Tech in a studio apartment on Capitol Hill when she was 26, running the initial product on 2 second-hand servers she bought off a university auction. The company built network security infrastructure for hospitals and financial institutions. It was unglamorous, technical, and deeply necessary. Victoria was good at it in the way that certain people are good at things not because they love the work, but because the work gives shape to a life that would otherwise feel dangerously formless. Now, at 41, she ran a company with 400 employees, offices in 3 cities, and a valuation that made the financial press write the same profile of her every 18 months with slightly updated numbers. Decisive, demanding, visionary. The profiles never mentioned that she ate dinner at her desk most nights, or that she had missed her mother's last coherent birthday because she was in Frankfurt closing a licensing deal that could have waited a week. The merger with Cascade Systems represented 15 years of work compressed into a single transaction. Cascade controlled hospital network infrastructure across the Pacific Northwest. Combined with Halberg's security layer, the merged entity would hold a dominant position in healthcare data protection, an area of the market that was about to become essential in ways most people hadn't grasped yet. Victoria had. She had been building toward this for 3 years. Grace Park, her CTO, had flagged an anomaly at 6:15 that evening. Unusual read requests from 3 internal accounts. She'd recommended escalating to the security operations team. Victoria had approved the escalation and returned to her call with Cascade's lead attorney. At 8:40, the alerts turned red. By 9, she was alone on the floor, the rest of the team having been sent home 2 hours earlier, watching the deletion counters climb and understanding, with terrible clarity, that the escalation had been too slow. Ethan Cole had been listening to a podcast about recursive algorithms when he pushed his cart onto the 42nd floor. He listened to technical podcasts most nights. Programming theory, system architecture, network security. He listened the way some people listen to music, not to absorb information precisely, but because the sound of people discussing problems with clarity and rigor was the closest thing he had to professional conversation anymore. 3 years earlier, he had been a senior security engineer at a defense contractor in Redmond. He had been good. Not prodigiously gifted, he would have said so himself, but rigorous and patient, which in security work was often more useful. He had a particular aptitude for behavioral analysis, identifying attack patterns from the shape of anomalous data rather than from known signatures. When his wife, Claire, was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, he took family leave. The leave became extended. The extended leave became a resignation. He had told himself he would return to the field when Claire stabilized. She didn't stabilize. She declined for 14 months and died on a Tuesday in March, at home, with Ethan and their daughter beside her. Their daughter, Lily, was 7. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's habit of going very quiet when she was processing something important. After the funeral and the settling of accounts, Ethan had applied to 11 companies. 3 declined without interview. 6 did not respond. 2 interviewed him and then went silent. He understood, if not accepted, the calculus. A 3-year employment gap in cybersecurity was read as obsolescence. The field had changed. The assumption was that he hadn't kept up. He had kept up, but he had no way to demonstrate that without a position, and he couldn't get a position without the demonstration. It was a clean, closed loop. He took the maintenance job because it paid reliably and allowed him to be home by 6:30 every evening. Lily had a sitter, a retired school teacher named Frances, who lived 3 floors below them, but Ethan had made a promise to himself that Lily would eat dinner with him every night, at the table, without screens. It was the one fixed point he had given her since Claire died. He spent his evenings, after Lily was asleep, working through security coursework on a laptop he had bought used. Not because he believed it would open doors, mostly because it was the only time in the day when his mind went fully quiet. At 9:12 on a wet Tuesday in October, he pushed his cart past the glass-walled executive suite on the 42nd floor and saw the deletion counter on the monitor inside. He recognized the pattern immediately. Not the specific attack, the shape of it. The way data was being removed was too clean for ransomware, too targeted for a system failure. It had the signature of someone who knew exactly where to look. He said what he saw. He had not planned to. It came out the way a reflex comes out. Victoria closed the office door behind Ethan and pointed at the main display. "Tell me what you're seeing." He set the brake on his cart and moved to the monitor. He stood with his hands at his sides, not touching anything, just reading. She watched his eyes track across the alert log. "The deletion is sequential," he said. "It's moving through your file system in alphabetical order by directory name. That means it's scripted. Someone wrote this before tonight. Our security team flagged unusual access 3 hours ago. Did they isolate the accounts? They escalated." He looked at her briefly. "The accounts are still active." She picked up her phone and called Grace Park. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried the secondary operations line. A junior analyst answered, sleep-rough and confused, and told her the senior team had concluded the anomaly was a logging error and had gone home. Victoria set the phone down with more control than she felt. "The server backup," Ethan said. "Where is it hosted?" "Separate physical location. Eastgate Data Center. Air-gapped from the primary. Then you haven't lost everything yet. But the script will finish the primary system in approximately 4 hours at this rate." He paused. "I need to know if you're authorizing me to touch your systems, because if you are, I can try to interrupt the deletion and trace the origin point. If you're not, you should call whoever you trust most in your security organization and wake them up right now." She looked at him for a long moment. He was, perhaps, 35. The maintenance uniform was clean and pressed. His hands were still at his sides. "What's your name?" "Ethan Cole." "Why are you mopping floors at Halberg Tech, Ethan?" "I'll answer that when the deletion counter is at 0, he said. "Right now you have a decision to make." She pulled a chair to the workstation and gestured at the keyboard. "Do it." They moved to the sub-basement at 10:15. The server room was cold and loud, the steady mechanical roar of cooling systems that never slept. Ethan worked at a terminal VIC card accessed for him, moving quickly and without explanation for the first 40 minutes. She stood behind him and watched. He typed in the way people type when the keyboard is a tool, not a performance. No visible searching. No hesitation at the command line. She recognized it. She had typed that way once, in the early years, before she became a person who made decisions rather than a person who built things. At 11, he stopped the deletion script by corrupting its progress log, a method she hadn't seen before, which forced the script to restart from the beginning rather than continue, buying time. Then he began working backward through the access logs. "Talk me through it," she said. "I'm not going to interrupt." He did. He explained each step as he worked, not for her benefit, she suspected, but because verbalizing his reasoning helped him think. He had been a teacher once, or had wanted to be, something in the cadence. She learned that the attack had been staged over 6 weeks. 3 internal accounts had been compromised, but none of them had initiated the attack. They had been used as relay points, intermediate nodes, whose access permissions were inherited by the actual attack script, which was running from a 4th account that appeared, on the surface, to be a routine automated backup process. "Someone with deep system knowledge built this," he said, around 2 in the morning. "They knew your architecture. They knew which backup account would have the necessary permissions and draw the least attention." "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "Security work?" "About 12 years, on and off." He paused. "Off? Mostly. For the last 3. She didn't push. There would be time. At 3:17 in the morning, the last deletion alert cleared. Ethan executed a verification script he had written from scratch in the past 2 hours. It ran for 11 minutes and returned a clean read. He leaned back in the chair and exhaled. "The primary system is intact. The deletion was interrupted before it reached the IP archive. You'll want your team to audit everything in the morning, but the merger documentation should be recoverable." Victoria had been standing for 6 hours. She sat down on the edge of a server rack housing and pressed her hands together between her knees. She did not say thank you immediately. She sat with the relief for a moment, which was unusual for her. She normally moved past relief, straight into the next problem. "Now," she said, "why are you mopping floors?" He told her about Claire in the elevator going back up. The diagnosis, the leave, the resignation, the 14 months, the job search after. He gave her the facts, without shaping them toward sympathy, which made them land harder. She listened without speaking. This was one of the things she was genuinely good at, listening without needing to fill silence. When he finished, she said, "I want to offer you a role in our security division. Not a junior analyst position. I want you as the lead on an internal threat assessment project we've needed to run for 8 months and haven't had the right person for." Ethan looked at her. They were standing in her office, the city still dark outside, the rain still coming down. "That's not a standard HR process. No, your CTO will have concerns." "She will. I haven't held a formal title in 3 years. My credentials are current, I've been maintaining them on my own, but nothing on paper will make that look like anything other than a gap." "I watched you work tonight for 6 hours, Victoria said. "I don't need to see your resume." He was quiet for a moment. "I have a daughter. She's 7. I need to leave by 5:30 every day, without exception. If that's a problem, I understand, but it's not negotiable." "Agreed. I'll want to talk to your CTO directly before I accept. I'm not interested in starting a role where my immediate supervisor thinks I shouldn't be there." Victoria considered this. It was the kind of condition that most people in his position, desperate, grateful, would not have had the composure to set. She respected it. "I'll arrange a meeting." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll think about it." She had expected yes, immediately. She found, unexpectedly, that she respected him more for not giving it. The meeting with Grace Park happened 2 days later, in a small conference room with no glass walls. Ethan walked Grace through everything he had done in the server room. The methods, the reasoning, the novel technique for interrupting the deletion script. Grace asked hard questions. Ethan answered them without hedging. Afterward, Grace came to Victoria's office and said, "He's legitimate. He's also better than most of what I have." She paused. "I still think the process should have been different." "I know," Victoria said, "but I'm not going to obstruct it." Ethan started the following Monday. He arrived at 7:15 and left at 5:29 every day, without apology. He spent the first 2 weeks doing exactly what he had been hired to do: a full behavioral audit of the company's internal access logs going back 18 months. It was careful, slow work. He built a timeline of access anomalies, flagging events that would have looked routine to a signature-based detection system, but that shared characteristics with the attack on merger night. There were more than he had expected. The events clustered around 2 periods: 6 weeks before the merger announcement and 3 weeks before the Q3 earnings release. Both events had moved the stock. Anyone with advanced knowledge of either would have had substantial opportunity. He flagged the pattern in a written report rather than going to Victoria directly. He wanted the record to be clean and procedural. The report went to Grace first. Grace called him into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She had printed the report and annotated it in red pen. "The access clusters originate from 3 accounts," she said. "2 of them are analyst level, no surprise. But the third one," she set the report on the desk and turned it to face him. "The third account belonged to Margaret Sloan, CFO, 10-year tenure, one of the 3 people in the building with master access credentials." "This could be a spoofed origin," Ethan said, carefully. "It could," Grace agreed, "which is why you need to keep going." He went back to the logs. He built a secondary dataset, accessed time correlations between Margaret's account activity and the timing of the 2 market events. He was not trying to prove guilt. He was trying to establish whether there was sufficient anomaly to warrant referring the matter to legal. He held himself to that standard deliberately, because the alternative, pursuing the hypothesis that the CFO was a traitor, required more certainty than he had, and more authority than he was willing to assume. What he found, after 9 days of careful work, was a pattern of data reads that matched the information that had moved the market. The timing was not dispositive, but it was not coincidence either. He flagged a second report. This one went to Victoria directly. She called him into her office that evening, after most of the floor had emptied. She read the report once, in full, without speaking. Then she read the key sections again. "Margaret has been with me for 10 years, she said. "I know," he said. "The data doesn't care about that." She looked at him for a long moment. "What do you need to be certain?" "A trap," he said. He built the honeypot on a Saturday morning, while Lily was at a birthday party for a classmate named Jordan. The setup took 4 hours. He created a directory inside the company's document management system that appeared, from the outside, to contain pre-merger due diligence materials for a fictitious acquisition. Target a company with a name and registration number that did not exist, but that would look, to someone doing a rapid search, like a plausible deal. The directory was accessible only to a small set of accounts. Margaret's was one of them. The trap had a logging flag on every read event, routed to a monitor he had set up on a separate system that Margaret did not have access to. On Monday morning, he drove Lily to school, watched her walk through the front doors, and went to work. On Wednesday, he received the first message. It came to his personal email address, which was not public. The message contained his home address, Lily's school name, and a single line of text: "Some investigations end better when they stop." He forwarded the message to Grace and Victoria without reading it a second time. Then he sat at his desk and did not move for approximately 2 minutes. On Thursday, Frances, the retired teacher who sat with Lily in the afternoons, called him at 4 o'clock. Her voice was careful and level, which told him before the words did that something had happened. "There was a man outside the school at pickup," she said. "He was watching. He left when I looked at him directly, but he was there for most of the walk home. Ethan left the building without telling anyone where he was going. He drove to the school, found Lily in the principal's office, calm on the surface, holding the sleeve of her jacket with both hands, the way she had done since she was small when something frightened her, and crouched in front of her. "I'm here," he said. "You're okay." She let go of her sleeve and held onto his arm instead. He drove her home. He sat at the kitchen table that evening while she did homework across from him and tried to think clearly about what he was doing. He had a daughter. He had made a promise to her mother, which was, be there. Not be brave. Not be righteous. Be there. He almost called Victoria that night to withdraw. Instead, after Lily was asleep, he sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. He thought about what it would mean to teach Lily that the right thing to do, when it became frightening, was to stop. He was not sure he could bear to teach her that. He called Victoria at 10:45. "I'm not stopping," he said. "But I need your help. I need someone watching Lily's school, and I need this finished in the next 2 weeks." Victoria said, "I'll make both of those happen." She did. The honeypot triggered on a Friday at 7:18 in the morning, before most of the staff had arrived. The account that accessed the fictitious directory was Margaret's. Ethan's monitor recorded the access, the duration, and the specific files read. What the log also captured was the outbound data transfer that followed 30 minutes later, a compressed packet sent from Margaret's workstation to an external address. The address routed through 2 anonymizing relays, but Ethan had anticipated this and had embedded a tracer in the honeypot files that survived compression. The packet ended at a server registered to a shell company in Delaware. It took him 2 more days to connect the shell company to Apex Neural Systems, a competitor that had lost a significant contract to Halberg 3 years earlier and had been pursuing a hostile acquisition strategy in the market ever since. He compiled everything into a document that was 61 pages long, cross-referenced and logged. He wrote it so that a federal prosecutor could follow it without needing to understand the technical details. He had spent a weekend on the formatting alone, because he understood that the work only mattered if it could be read by the right people. He took the document to Victoria on a Tuesday evening. She read it in her office while he waited in the outer room. It took her 50 minutes. When she came out, her face was composed, which he had learned meant she was managing something large. "Margaret's been with me since the beginning," she said. "Not an argument, just a fact she was integrating." "I know. She was at my mother's funeral." He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. "When do you think it started?" "The data suggests approximately 2 years ago, after the Apex contract loss. My read is that she was approached, that someone at Apex identified her as a potential asset and cultivated the relationship slowly. That's consistent with the behavior pattern. It doesn't start with large data transfers. It starts with small ones." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "I need to call my attorney." "And the FBI?" "Yes. Will you sit with me for this?" He considered the question. It was late. Francis was with Lily. "Yes," he said. The FBI moved on a Thursday morning, coordinating with Halberg's legal team. There was no dramatic scene in Margaret's office. Federal investigations rarely accommodated drama. 2 agents arrived at 8:15, presented credentials to the front desk, and were escorted upstairs by the building security manager. Ethan was not present for the arrest. He had been asked not to be by the FBI case agent, who explained that his presence would complicate the chain of custody documentation if the case went to trial. He understood this and agreed. He heard about it from Grace, who had been asked to be present as a company representative. She called him at 9:40. "It's done," she said. How did she respond? Grace was quiet for a moment. She didn't say anything. Not a word. She looked at me, and then she looked away, and she let them put the handcuffs on. He thought about 10 years. He thought about the merger night, and whether the attack had been designed to kill the deal and drop the stock, or whether there had been a larger plan that he had interrupted before it fully unfolded. He suspected the latter. He would probably never know for certain. "One more thing," Grace said. She had a lawyer on the phone in the elevator. The lawyer said they were going to challenge the admissibility of the honeypot evidence. "They can try," Ethan said. "The setup was disclosed to your legal team before I ran it. Everything is documented." "I know," Grace said. "I just wanted you to hear it." He hung up and looked at his desk. Outside the window, the rain had finally stopped. The October sky was white and clear in the way it sometimes got after a long storm. Not warm, but clean. He had 3 more anomalies to document from the audit that hadn't been connected to Margaret's activity. He opened the file and kept working. The Cascade merger closed in November, delayed by 3 weeks while the legal team worked through the implications of the internal breach. The final terms were slightly worse than Victoria had negotiated in September, which she accepted without complaint. The deal still made structural sense. It was still the right move. Margaret Sloane's case moved to federal court. Apex Neural Systems' general counsel resigned the week after the indictment was made public. The SEC opened a parallel investigation into trading activity in Halberg stock during the 18 months prior. Victoria cooperated fully and said nothing to the press beyond a 2-paragraph statement drafted by her attorney. Ethan's role in the investigation was a matter of record in the federal filing. His name appeared twice in the section describing the discovery of the honeypot evidence. He was not identified as a former maintenance worker. He was identified as the company's head of internal threat analysis, which was the title Victoria had given him when she formalized his position in October. In January, Victoria launched what she called the Second Chance Program, a structured hiring initiative aimed at qualified candidates with non-traditional career gaps. The program's criteria were straightforward: demonstrable current competency, reference from a person who had worked with them in the relevant field, willingness to complete a structured assessment. The resume was given less weight than any other factor. It was not announced with fanfare. It was listed on the company's careers page as a standard hiring track and quietly circulated through veterans networks, re-entry programs, and professional associations. 23 people were hired through the program in the first 8 months. 3 of them turned out to be exceptional. The rest were solid. None of them were mistakes. Ethan still left the building at 5:29 every day. This had become, without any formal declaration, a known fact in the company. His calendar blocked the time as unavailable. Nobody scheduled over it. On a Saturday in February, he brought Lily to the office for the first time. He had promised her a tour after she had asked 3 times what his job actually was. She moved through the space with the quiet attention she gave to most things, looking at everything. Saying little and asked approximately 40 questions that he answered as accurately as he could. In the elevator going back down, she said, "Your office is smaller than I thought it would be. It's a practical size. But you're important here. I do important work here." That's different. She thought about this. Mom would say that's the right way to think about it. He looked down at her. She was watching the elevator numbers descend. "Yeah," he said. She would. They had been waiting in the lobby for perhaps 5 minutes when Victoria came through the main entrance in running clothes, clearly not having expected to see anyone. She stopped when she saw them. Lily looked at her with the direct, evaluating look that children apply to adults they've heard about but not met. Victoria crouched to Lily's level, not in the theatrical way that some adults did, overperforming warmth, but simply to make eye contact. "You must be Lily," she said. "You're the one who gave my dad the job," Lily said. "He gave himself the job," Victoria said. "I just got out of the way." Lily considered this with visible skepticism. Then, apparently deciding to let it pass, she asked, "Do you own the whole building?" "I lease most of it." "That's almost the same." Victoria looked up at Ethan. Something crossed her face that he didn't fully categorize. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. "She's not wrong," he said. They left together, the three of them, into the February afternoon. The sky was the pale gray of late winter in Seattle, not raining for once, the air cold and sharp and carrying the faint salt smell that came off the Sound on clear days. Victoria had cleared her afternoon calendar, which she had done exactly 4 times in the past 11 years. She did not examine this fact closely. She walked beside them down the block, hands in her jacket pockets, listening to Lily explain a complicated dispute she was having with a classmate about the rules of a game whose logic Victoria could not entirely follow. She did not try to solve it. She just listened. It was a thing she was still learning to do, to be present in a moment without calculating what the moment was for, without measuring it against what else she could be doing. She had built an entire company on the discipline of forward motion. She was finding, slowly, that forward motion was not the same thing as living. Lily finished her story and looked up at her. "What would you do? About the game? About my classmate?" Victoria thought about it honestly. "I'd probably tell her the rules don't matter as much as whether you're both having fun." Lily made a face. "That's what adults always say, because it's usually true. It's also a way of not answering." Victoria laughed, a real one, brief and unguarded. "Fair enough." Ethan watched this from the side without commenting. He had noticed that Victoria, when she was not managing something, had a quality he hadn't expected. Patience. Not the performed patience of someone waiting for an opening, but actual patience. The kind that meant she could be in a moment without needing the moment to be useful. He wasn't sure she knew she had it. They stopped at a corner for the light. "Thank you," Ethan said. "Not for anything specific. For the morning, for the program, for the decision made at 9 on a October night in a failing office." All of it, compressed into 2 words. Victoria looked at him. She didn't deflect it. "I should be thanking you," she said. "You gave someone a chance," he said. "That matters more than you think." The light changed. They crossed. Lily reached up and took Victoria's hand without asking, because she was 7 and had not yet learned to interrogate her own impulses. Victoria held it. Above them, the February sky held steady gray and cold and entirely without rain. For once, the city moved around them with its usual indifference, the particular indifference of cities that have seen everything and remembered very little. But some things held, not because they were supposed to, not because they were built to last, because 2 people, on a wet October night, had each made a small and deliberate choice, one to speak and to listen, and those choices had accumulated, quietly, into something that looked, from the outside, like luck. It wasn't luck, it never is.